All right, we never stop talking SEC football. It's every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Central. It's SEC Breakdown with Chad Napling, David Waters, and Mike LaValle from Last Word on Sports. I'm Mark Rogers, and we are psyched to talk SEC football. The coaches were at the podium at the spring meetings down on the coast, and we also have some not necessarily breaking news, but what we could call a hot take from Antonio Callaway, suspended wide receiver from Florida, who is pretty confident based on his recent tweet, if you check out his Twitter feed just coming down a few minutes ago, that he's going to be playing at the University of Florida this week. So coming up this fall. So David, we'll start with you in regards to Callaway's situation and what you think he may be, the cryptic message might be telling us.
Right. We know he was suspended by Florida in January for violating the university's code of conduct policy. And now, McElwain come out and said he's not enrolled in summer classes as of right now. And to me, it's not out of the ordinary for a player not to be enrolled right now in summer A classes. A lot of players take that semester off to relax. But with everything surrounding, what we don't know about the Callaway situation, it does raise some eyebrows. And I think the longer this goes on, the scarier the outcome may be that he may not play for Florida this fall. But right before we started, I was scouring Twitter just a little bit, and lo and behold, Callaway tweets, "I don't want to play anywhere but the swamp." 5 minutes later, posts a picture behind the scenes, and it's him and Jim McElwain. So, it seems that, if you ask Callaway, he looks like everything will be taken care of if you follow what he is. There's plenty of rumors out there of what may have happened, part something that may have went on during the weekend. Florida hosted Jacob Eason, the quarterback who ended up committing to Georgia. And maybe a little more serious allegations than that, but we can't really dive in too much to that because that's really all it is. But like I said, I think the longer that it goes on, the scarier that it is that he may not be a part of the Florida team. But if he's not, he's the best player on this Florida offense that has struggled in seasons past. The quarterback situation at UF. The offense needs every weapon it can get, and he's one of the SEC's best. Florida hasn't had a playmaker like him since Percy Harvin, and he led the team, with 678 yards, and that's the most ever also by a first-year Gator. So, he was the playmaker that kept Florida in games. He won the Tennessee game for him. He had a big catch against LSU and a punt return against LSU to tie that game up. Florida ultimately lost, and also in the first half against Alabama was a punt returner and 4 touchdowns. So it's more than just, he's a receiver. He's the best playmaker Florida has altogether.
Yeah, so 2 big players in the SEC Eastern Division may not make it onto the field in 2016. We talk about Callaway. We also talk about Sky Moore, who's been a safety. He's been a linebacker at South Carolina, and in my eyes has been the best player on that defense since Quarles and Sutton and Clowney moved on to the NFL a few seasons back after the 2013 campaign, and we see what the Gamecocks have done on defense since then. Again, Sky Moore, though, herniated disc. He's been ruled out for the 2016 season. Chad, your thoughts about Sky Moore, and if you have any thoughts about Callaway as well.
Yeah, the Callaway situation, I think David hit the nail on the head. I think at this point you're kind of concerned is he going to be a part of this team? What's the situation going to end up being? There's still a little bit of time before this fall, but definitely a big part of what Florida's offense is going to try to do with Coach Mack there. Jumping into Sky, the situation with Sky Moore, I think if you're Muschamp and you're trying to rebuild this defense and you're trying to put your mark on the field, as it were, Muschamp is known for putting out a pretty good defense. He's done it with Florida. He's done it at Texas. This is a program that he would intend to build that side of the ball around a guy like Sky Moore. 3-year starter, now a senior, who will have to redshirt this year due to the herniated disc in his neck that he's going to have surgery on. He will redshirt and return for the 2017 season. At least that's what Muschamp had said. Things could change between now and then, but I do think he had the opportunity to turn pro after this year, but decided to come back. And I think he will indeed play in 2017. I know some people will be skeptical of the fact that he could possibly say he's coming back redshirt and then maybe jump and try out for the pros. But I don't think that'll be the case. He knows how important he is to this team. And again, you made a great point with, Quarles, Clowney. This guy was there at a very young age, a part of those defenses that we saw, went through the 3-4 transition with Ward that didn't really work out. We saw how that turned out for South Carolina. So you turn around and look now, all eyes are on the guys who are going to step in for Sky Moore. And one of those guys, Rashad Fenton, who's a guy who's played strong safety for them that possibly could slide down and play that linebacker spot, beef him up a little bit. He's athletic enough. He has the speed. So that specifically could be a guy that we look at. And then you turn around and you look at Lorenz Bryant, T.J. Holloman is another guy, Jonathan Walton. And I think you have to look at Bryson Allen Williams, who's a guy that possibly could do it. He played the Sam linebacker at one point, as long as a few other spots. So he has the more experience out of the bunch, possibly, that you could see him. Either way it goes, it's going to be tough to replace a guy like Sky Moore because, honestly, in my opinion, he would have easily been a first-team, second-team All-SEC type of guy. It's going to be really hard to replace. And, again, it comes as a blow for South Carolina. Now, what's the impact going into this season? I don't know, because I think there's still a lot of questions for this team offensively. But it's just one more blow that comes to this team, and Muschamp in his first year.
So, yeah, Sky Moore's a guy that's been filling up the box score there since he walked on campus this past season. 4 interceptions, 4th in the SEC, 68 total tackles, 3rd in the conference, 110 total tackles, 4th ranked in the SEC. Mike, your thoughts about Sky Moore's unfortunate incident physically that he's not going to be able to step on the field this fall?
Mark, I think the Sky Moore injury for South Carolina is absolutely devastating for that team. They're a team that's trying to work their way back up in the SEC East. They've not had success in the last 2 years on defense. They've had those. I think they had 3 fourth-quarter 20-point more or more comebacks last season. So you get Muschamp in. He's a guy that builds his defense. I think Sky Moore has led the team in tackles his previous 3 seasons. I'm a big proponent that the SEC is a conference won or lost at the line of scrimmage. And if you look at linebackers, clearly they're not the defensive tackles and defensive ends on the line of scrimmage. When you have a linebacker that for 3 straight years has accumulated all those tackles, that's a guy who can help control the line of scrimmage, make those tackles, and prevent those big plays. And when you talk about a team that gives up 3 20-point comebacks in the fourth quarter, you've got to factor in there's a lot of missed tackles in there. Sky Moore is a guy that can help that defense get South Carolina back up to that middle of the pack or maybe even challenge in the SEC East. His loss, I think, from a schematic and player perspective, leadership in the locker room, is absolutely devastating to that defense in Muschamp's first year. I'd also like to spend just a few minutes on the Callaway thing, not so much on the analysis, which I think David hit right on the top of the head. My question is this an indication of the tide of discipline changing in college football? If it is, in fact, a student infraction from a recruiting visit, this is the off-season. Just a few years ago, you almost never heard of discipline issues being adjudicated in the off-season. If they were pretty serious incidences. So in the light of Baylor, in the light of FSU and the Winston and Cook issues, are we now going to start seeing college coaches go flip to the other side? Or are they now getting the message that with social media and information technology the way it is today, you can't hide anything? Are we going to see college coaches try to get in front of these issues and the pendulum of discipline swing completely the other way from where we've seen it in the past couple of decades of college football? That's what I think is significant about the Callaway issue.
Mike, that's not really new for Florida either. Treon Harris 2 seasons ago when he took over for Jeff Driscoll, he got, there was the alleged sexual assault that went on there, and it wasn't even Will Muschamp. It was the athletic department of Florida, pretty much. Since with this Callaway thing, and maybe like you said, maybe along the same lines. They are stepping in before anything even comes out. Like, yes, they are going ahead just in case there is anything that can shed the program in a negative light. They're going ahead and stepping in and making sure these players aren't in the spotlight, aren't part of the team while this goes on. So yeah, you're right. You're right about that. It does seem to. For Florida in particular, we've seen 2 examples now to where this may be the case. Like, the landscape may be changing, and not every story is the same. So like I said, the Callaway we don't really know a lot about just yet. So it is kind of weird that it's taken this long, even if it's a student code of conduct. And I'll hit on Sky Moore right quick. it is weird. Muschamp still has the bad luck of the injuries. We know at Florida, Jeff Driscoll went down with the injury, and in 2013, after they had a very successful 2012, they lost so many guys due to injury, and it seems that bad luck has followed Muschamp there. We don't really know what they were going to use Sky Moore for, because he missed the spring as well, and it kind of seemed like they maybe could put him in that safety hybrid linebacker role that Muschamp used with Keanu Neal at Florida and like Cam Chancellor with the Seahawks. And it seemed like they were going to move him around a little bit from everything we've heard. But like I said, he missed spring as well. So it was going to be interesting to see how Muschamp and Tavares Robinson were going to use him. But now going through spring, it seems like they had to plan around that anyway. So they got a little bit of a jump start on it. But it is a very bad thing with your first year to lose the talent of Sky Moore.
Dave, I'm not trying to pick on Florida. I think Jeremy Foley is a great athletic director. My question is, what do you think would happen if during the Pouncey brothers and Hernandez era at Florida with Urban Meyer as the coach, if Twitter was around, what do you think would have happened to that Florida program if social media and Twitter was around with the Pouncey brothers and Mr. Hernandez?
Oh, I agree. It would have been, that was Urban Meyer's world at that time, and I think that really opened Jeremy Foley's eyes as to what reputation happened when Urban Meyer and what was going on with the Hernandez and Pounceys and the Percy Harvin rumors of hitting coaches and all that. There were so many rumors coming out of Florida, and it was all brushed under the rug because 2 national championships. And so we still look back at it as we'll take the rings anyway. But the more you go back and look at it, it was an ugly situation. The more we keep hearing as time has gone by.
Come on, Mike. Urban Meyer's put the clamps on Twitter that are there at Ohio State, so I'm sure that he would have had everything under control, even in the Twitter rule.
I'm sure he would have.
All right, let's move on to satellite camps. We've discussed them many times, but they continue to stay in the news because there's an obvious advantage to some of the powers up north to hold them, in particular the school up north. Versus the SEC. It's obviously no advantage to the SEC, and no big surprise that SEC prominent coaches are against satellite camps. Chad, your thoughts about what Nick Saban said this week, where at one point any coaches across the country, especially in the SEC, wouldn't name Jim Harbaugh by name, but we've gotten to a point where it's basically just going to be stated, Jim Harbaugh, and he's the front and center man of this issue.
Yeah, I think Saban's comments basically, he had made some as of yesterday talking about he didn't know that this really benefited anybody, and this is really all about recruiting, and still cites the fact that it's really all about the high school coach, that relationship with the high school coach, and I would probably beg to differ a little bit that because it really depends on the kid. There's parents. There's always a gatekeeper. You as the recruiter have to figure out who that is when you're talking about recruiting. And I think that's really the big portion of it is building the relationship. Now the satellite camps, do they really affect the SEC? Does it affect their recruiting? I don't know that really necessarily comes into play. I would be the person that probably jumps to the opposite side of it. As long as the SEC continues to have success, I would welcome any other school to come in down here and have a satellite camp. I understand that there are those who are really highly against it with the fact that Harbaugh went down to IMG. IMG is one of the most highly touted recruiting hotbeds for SEC schools that there is probably in the South. Let's be honest about it. They go out and they get these guys to come in and from all over the world. In fact, we had a guy from who is either Swedish or Norwegian. He'll probably kick me for saying that, but Froholt is who is an Arkansas commit, 4-star lineman who defensive tackle who is now on the offensive line for Arkansas, but was an IMG guy, and so. That being said, there's a lot of really good recruits that come out of that school, and I can understand where some people were probably pretty nervous about it. I myself, at the first glance, was, but that being said, NCAA had some strict rulings in the fact that coaches were not to interact with high school kids while entertaining these type of satellite camps while at IMG, and I think that that's a major portion that needs to be kept in mind. Is that NCAA stuff has to be kept in mind, and they have to follow those rulings when they can. And if they break those, then you have to hold them accountable, much like the situation that we're going to talk about in a little bit with Ole Miss and their recruiting situations and those violations. But I think that at this point, the satellite camps, I wouldn't fear it. If I was the SEC, if anything, I would take advantage of it. Why does it have to be such a negative? Why don't you turn it into a positive and actually go out and do the same thing? I mean, satellite camps, for example, Arkansas goes to Texas. Texas is a big pipeline for them. They could go in to Reliant, one of the stadiums, Dallas Cowboys Stadium, host a summer camp, gives an opportunity for some of these Texas high school kids to actually be seen that the coaches maybe or may not see. There's a lot of debate on how much the satellite camp actually benefits the recruit. But in my opinion, just from knowing guys that follow recruiting and that report on recruiting, there are some kids that do not have the resources to go to these 247s or rivals camps, these functions that come up. And this may be an opportunity, a satellite camp may be an opportunity for a kid who may or may not have the chance to go to one of those to get in front of these coaches and maybe catch their attention. And you know what? If it's 1 out of 100, that's the one that possibly could go on and have a big future. And I think that's worth it to me in that opinion, because it's all about bettering the kids' lives. And if they've got an opportunity to do that, then why not? Give them that chance. So no, I'm not as strict on the satellite camps. In fact, I would think the SEC could probably kill it if they really wanted to and had satellite camps throughout the country.
Yes, I agree. I don't think satellite camps are necessarily a bad thing. It gives you more opportunity to put your program in front of the kids even more, whether it's a kid who's not highly recruited or a kid that is highly recruited. It's just another chance for you to get in front of that kid and make an impression. I do think the big, gigantic Power 5 schools, your Michigans, Ohio States, Floridas, Alabamas, Tennessees of the world, I think it's for them. I think it is recruiting. I don't think it is about developmental purposes as much as it is for your smaller Mississippi States, Purdue's of the world, who they really do need to go out there and and look at these kids and develop. But I think for the bigger schools, it's more a recruiting tool, and I think that's where the NCAA probably does need to step in a little bit. I think there needs to be some limits on them, maybe 5, not these 30 that Jim Harbaugh is doing at Michigan. Hey, he's going to be 10 minutes from my house here Friday in Jacksonville. I may step in a little bit. I'll leave you by yourself. But I mean, it's he's got this rock star summer tour going on, and now with his comments, against Saban and all that, it's just when does it become too much? Is he alienating himself with all these comments about what do other coaches think about him just going off and shutting off at the mouth and not really a big care in the world? Because right now, to me, if you ask me right now today, Jim Harbaugh is bigger than Michigan right now. You can't name me their starting quarterback or where he transferred from, and a lot of people can't right now. Your generic college football fan probably can't tell you that, but they definitely can tell you about Jim Harbaugh, satellite camps, and where he's coaching. So there's a lot of things going on right now. Who knew satellite camps in Michigan would blow up like this? But it's all because of Jim Harbaugh.
Right now it's Wilton Spate and it's Chad Morris as his backup. But anyway.
You knew he would know.
I did.
And I can't think of the third kid's name, but it's right at the tip of my tongue. All right, Mike, what are you saying about satellite camps these days and the latest rhetoric?
Well, first of all, I think we should separate the issue. Chad mentioned the practice and the Michigan practice that they held at IMG. Look, when you pick up your entire football team and take them across the country to have a practice a la NFL training camp style or NFL teams, there's no benefit to your team for doing that. I think it's a complete waste of money and time for the kids. They did that over the team's spring break. So those guys didn't get a break from school. So I think the first mistake the NCAA made when they did the legislation 2 months ago was they grouped that with the actual issue, which is coaches camps. So I think that was the first mistake the NCAA did. But they played right into Harbaugh's hand. They confused and they overreacted quickly because of what he did at IMG. So for the IMG thing, I don't think there's any reason for that. That stuff, I think, has no place in college ball, particularly when you're taking kids away from campus over spring break. These kids already put unmeasurable amount of hours in on top of their schoolwork. So I think that's got to go away. I think that's clear. I don't know how you justify it the other way. For the coaches camps, David talked about this. I'm reading straight from Dan Murphy's article today. Michigan coaches are going to Pago Pago this week for a camp for 430 kids. For an island that only has 7 schools. Then they're going to fly another 3,000 miles to Australia for round 2. They're going to visit 40 camps in a 29-day tour. If one person did it, it would be 17,119 miles, and almost all of his coaches are doing it. What is the cost to Michigan? What is the cost to the program? Those coaches are going to be away from their team, although the kids probably aren't in class. I do think there's got to be limits. Harbaugh is a great football coach, but he's got a little bit of Lane Kiffin in him. He's got this bravado about him, this attitude that there's no bad thing as negative publicity when you're a recruiter in college football, and just the kind of brashness. He's almost like a matured Lane Kiffin who can actually really coach football really well. So I do think kind of Harbaugh is kind of over. He's kind of dictated the narrative so far. And I absolutely agree with Chad. There is benefits for these kids, for these coaches satellite camps, but there's got to be some limit. I don't think you can send out a whole coaching staff to go to 40 camps over a 29-day tour that covers over 17,000 miles when these colleges are having other issues outside of athletics. I think the optics of that is really bad for college football. I think that's what Nick Saban's trying to say. Nick Saban's never been a great communicator, and I think he's struggling in this battle of narratives with Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And along the same lines, I saw a blurb somewhere in the last month that a couple Big Ten schools are pushing for official recruiting visits to be conducted in June. Now, considering where these campuses are up north, of course they want these kids to step on campus in June when it's 82 degrees outside and say, despite what you've heard, it's pretty much like this all the time. Even though there's nobody in school in June and there's really no reason to come on campus at that point, let's bring on the football recruits in June when it's 98 in Florida. You don't want to go down there. It's 80 and beautiful right here in Madison, Wisconsin right now. This is what it's like all the time. Again, a couple flakes during the holidays, but that's about it.
The good news is there should be less shenanigans in June, less hostesses, less parties, and all that stuff.
Yes, that is very much true, very much true. Along the same lines, Mike, we'll stay with you. Brett Bielema came out during the spring meetings this week, and, of course, we continue along the lines of SEC Big Ten rivalry. We know that the SEC has been a better conference on the field generally over the last 10 to 15 years. I would say strictly in the last 10 years there's been no doubt about it. But when we look at the secondary competition off the field for rear ends in the seats, eyeballs on TV, and money, these two conferences are, by any measurement of those three, they're not even close to the rest of the other Power 5 conferences who are trying to maintain it. So the SEC generally has a slight advantage over the Big Ten, but if you look at attendance, money, and eyeballs on TV ratings, those two conferences are dominating college football, and the gap is growing. So Brett Bielema talking on-field competition. We know that these two conferences have for a long time, going back to the early 90s, had a 3-bowl contract, unlike really any two conferences out there, and it's been extended on and on and on because of the success of the Capital One Bowl, the Citrus Bowl at different points depending on the naming conventions, and of course the Outback Bowl, and in recent years the Gator Bowl. So would you like to see, Mike, the SEC and the Big Ten have a contract to play specific games, maybe full throttle, 14 on 14 for 2 weeks to start the season, or maybe one particular week? Would that be good? You know where I vote on this one.
Yeah, the answer is no, and here's why the answer to that is no. Because the SEC is really the only conference that markets itself as a conference. I think the other conferences are starting to, particularly the Big Ten. And one of the benefits of the SEC teams getting into Texas and playing the Big 12 teams getting, Tennessee played Oklahoma, Arkansas played Texas Tech. So getting into those Texas markets, one of the benefits of the SEC teams going west and playing teams in the Pac-12 market, getting into the California market, is they can showcase the SEC in those fertile recruiting grounds, in those markets where they don't have teams based. I think it's great and healthy for the SEC to have 3 or 4 teams play ACC teams to get in the Georgia, to get in the Atlanta and the South Florida market. 2 or 3 teams play Big 12 teams to get in that Texas market. 2 or 3 teams to play in the Pac-12 market to get to that West Coast market, and then 2 or 3 teams to play the Big 12. I think the SEC, from a conference leadership and a conference management perspective, has really cracked the code before the other conferences in the distribution of how they schedule their out-of-conference P5. I think it would be a very bad idea for the SEC to lock themselves into a basketball-type SEC Big Ten showdown. You can do that in basketball because you have X number of out-of-conference games. You can kind of run simultaneous tournaments. I think it would be a bad idea to do it in football for the reasons I just stated.
I'm going to go kind of the opposite direction because I know Mark's probably going to be in favor of this, but I mean, here's the thing. I think what Bielema was trying to get at, and he had made the comment of doing 7 one weekend and 7 the next weekend, and kind of pointed out that the SEC East has a lot of matchups against ACC teams, and geographically it makes sense, and I get that. And I do think that, the SEC, for what it's worth, it does catch a lot of flack as far as its schedule weakness. And Mark, I know this is something you've pointed out in the past that we've had shows on. Later in the season when teams are really ramping up their competition, and October, November seems to be a time when you get the FCS or the cupcake team kind of slides in, and that tends to happen in the SEC. And a lot of the thought process is the SEC sometimes kicks off their season a little bit earlier. Also, the fact that the SEC plays SEC teams, so there's no need to schedule tougher teams. But I think that with this 4-team playoff and situation, and the fact that we all know at some point it's going to grow in the future, the more teams that you can put yourself up against, as far as Power 5 teams are concerned, I think the better off you are. And yes, you're going to have to win your conference, and don't get me started on that because I'll start bashing the fact that there's not a conference championship in one of the Power 5 conferences at this point. But I do feel like you have to I do feel like you're going to have to do that. And it already is slated, if you're an SEC team, that you have to schedule a Power 5 school. Okay, we know that it's part of the scheduling, and that's in place. Now, whether that's Purdue to, say, Iowa State to, and these are the weaker teams in Power 5 conferences. Just because they're in a Power 5 doesn't mean they're good. But I think the whole thing is that, and he's thinking of it from a business aspect, and most people don't realize this about Bielema, but he does have a marketing and business background. That's what his major was in college. The guy is very calculated with everything he does, including his little YouTube channel thing that he's got going now that, being Brett Bielema, everything is extremely calculated with this man. And it's something of that type of magnitude where you have SEC, Big Ten. Think about how much you could market that. Think about how huge that would be if you had two big – good job. If you had two very big conferences opening up the first 2 weeks in college football, much like basketball is what he's thinking about. So I do see where there's a benefit to it, but like Mike, I like the fact that the SEC goes out and schedules in Arizona State, or they schedule in Arizona. I would like to see more SEC USC matchups like we're going to see at the start of this season. But out of all of it, I want to see the top of the Power 5 go at the top of the Power 5. That's what I would really like to see. I would like to see some way, form, or fashion for there to be some type of ranking, and we put these guys up against each other to kick off the season. I don't care if it's Big Ten, Pac, whatever, ACC. Let's put the big guys up against the big guys and kick off the season right. I'm tired of having all the discussions and the debates on Twitter about could Oregon beat this team, would Oregon beat this team if they were in the SEC, or vice versa. Let's just go ahead and knock it out. And, I think that something like this where he's talking about doing a Big Ten, you've got guys out there who are Ohio State fans who are always talking about, well, if Ohio State was in SEC, they would dominate, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's put the money where the mouth is and let's just go with it. I want to see the big teams go up against them. And I know Sankey came out and said, well, we typically call that bowl season. I get it, ha, funny. But let's see it happen during the regular season a little bit more, because that's what makes college football fun.
Yes, and this probably hits me at the perfect time because Florida's out-of-conference schedule this year is so bad that I wouldn't mind seeing, if they did have a Big Ten challenge, this year would be the perfect year for it. I don't think it needs to be an every year thing. I don't know if that was Bielema's point or not. A 1 year deal wouldn't bother me one bit. It would be nice to see bigger games, and I don't want these to be neutral site games either. And Sankey said, like he said, that's what we call bowl season. No, it would be nice to have these matchups in the Swamp, in Athens, in the Horseshoe, in Ann Arbor, in these big stadiums that these teams are known for. And, I mean, it's what makes college football great, these big games. And like I said, it probably hits me the perfect time when Florida's schedule is so weak. No, Mike, I see you shivering in there. Games played in September.
It's cold up there.
Yeah, but it does get on my nerves, too, to see these games late November. Florida State's coming up the next week. And this year we get Florida and listen to it, Presbyterian. Yeah, that's going to be a 90,000-seat stadium filled to about 60,000 capacity. Those games get on my nerves so much, and these, if you want to call it challenges, would help fix that issue a little bit. Florida's going to keep Florida State. Then you would have a mandatory Big Ten, Pac-12, Big 12 school. So, I mean, I do like the idea of SEC Big Ten, but I would like to see it rotate as well. It needs to be Pac-12 the next year, Big 12 the next year, ACC the next year, and kind of a rotation, not necessarily SEC Big Ten every year.
Mike, I totally get it from the standpoint of what does the SEC have to gain out of this, because when it comes to reputation on the field and respect from the College Football Committee, the SEC stands on the most firm ground of any conference. So they don't need to go out and prove anything. I think if the SEC played a nobody out of conference this season, the SEC champion would still be ushered into the college football playoff until it's proven that the SEC has declined, which it hasn't. The SEC is going to be given more favor than the other conferences to get to the college football playoff, and if you base it on track record, they've earned that. I would like to see it taken season to season, but based on track record, the SEC has earned it. And you make a great point in regards to footprints, the ACC footprint, the Big 12 footprint, and now we even see the Pac-12 footprint where Bama's gone to California, most successfully Tennessee to a certain extent, and even Ole Miss in this last recruiting class, and is starting to pluck away some of the better California players. Going to the Big Ten outside of Ohio and Pennsylvania, it would be the lesser of the 5 conferences in regards to a recruiting footprint. So there's really nobody that the SEC needs to pull out of the Big Ten country or footprint. And again, maybe a couple of Ohio kids skip off to Kentucky, and I know Alabama's pulled a few, but that's very scarce. So nothing to gain for the SEC, but as a football fan, would love to see it. And again, those are the 2 power brokers in college football, the SEC and the Big Ten, and I would love to see them battle it out more often in some of these great stadiums, and that was a good point by David. We see the opening affair at Cowboy Stadium, and we see the bowl games, but we know and question once we get to bowl competition how much motivation there is. I would think that there would be a lot, but we all know that there are varying levels of motivation based on the season and the expectations. Why not play it when we know, hey, it counts and everybody's motivated and everybody's healthy?
That was a great point by David, having the home and aways. We see a lot of neutral site games early in the season. Tennessee, for the past 4 seasons, has done home and aways with Oregon and Oklahoma to a great deal of success. Even when Tennessee was struggling 4 years ago, strong traveling contingent out of Oregon. It was great for Tennessee fans to see Alton and to get out to Oregon and see that football. And the home and away with Oklahoma the past 2 years was great for both fan bases. Oklahoma checkerboarded their stadium 2 years ago. Tennessee checkerboarded our stadium last year. There was a lot of back and forth between those 2 fan bases. It was great to have the home and away rather than neutral site. Dave, I couldn't agree more with you there.
And I thought it was basically criminal, as I may have stated 3 or 4 or 30 times on this show a couple of years ago, that the Pac-12 and the SEC were most likely the two best conferences 2 years ago. They didn't play each other at all. Zero. Didn't play each other in the postseason. Nothing. It's just these teams don't get together enough, and it's the greatest sport on earth. It's just mismanaged, and there's a number of issues involved in college football. So I believe Chad, before we sign off, has a very pertinent question for all three of us concerning Mr. Hugh Freeze. If Chad's still with us, I think he's standing on his head or something. He's so excited to spit this out.
Yeah. So the situation with Hugh Freeze has come up quite a bit, and today I was out on Knoxville radio up there talking, and one of the questions that was thrown to me was, do you believe Hugh Freeze at this point? Is he believable after the allegations have come out? Now that we know that there's been 4 level 1 infractions, 3 of those under his watch, including several. Those 3, I believe, are dealing specifically with Tunsil. That being said, the investigation in regards to Tunsil's comments at the NFL draft are still under investigation, so that's still yet to come. The findings there, where he made the comment about being paid as a player. We do know his stepdad got paid a little bit of money because he got $800 from a booster. That has come out. So that being said, the question was thrown at me: do you believe him? And that's something I wanted to throw at you guys. And what's it pertinent to? Well, it's pertinent to the Ole Miss program. Where do they stand right now? Is their coach believable? A few years back, let's remind everybody. Let's say. A few years back, he had dared someone to probe his program and find something dirty with it. And here we are now. We're talking about all these allegations and a $150,000 fine. And we still have one more looming investigation going involving Tunsil. So at this point, even with him talking with Bjork on Feinbaum, is he believable? And so I wanted to toss that to you guys.
So maybe I'll start off here. I generally approach these situations and approach people giving them the benefit of the doubt to start. And I'd like to respect people. I'd like to believe people until they give me reason not to. So the other thing that comes into play here is that I see it at the high school and collegiate level, and I've heard comparisons made to the money, the resources, the facilities, the time, and the expectations placed on athletes and coaches, let's say 20 or 30 years ago versus now. The cycle continues to spiral out of control in regards to what's expected. And we've talked about it more off camera than we have on camera. Is it impossible in this day and age for a program, for a coach to be completely clean, and be able to compete at that level? It almost seems impossible to me. Maybe I'm a little bit jaded, but it seems just about impossible that we know that there's cheating going on out there somewhere. So how would the programs that we haven't necessarily heard and have not been caught to date, how could they possibly be continuing to succeed and compete and recruit against the schools that are cheating? How would that possibly happen? So there's been a ton of smoke, and where there's smoke, there's fire, and this smoke is extremely thick, and it's in a number of directions. It's not just one isolated event. It's not a number of events that are all connected. It goes in many directions, down many paths when it comes to Ole Miss, and so it's difficult for me to think. Now, everything we hear out of Hugh Freeze's mouth is very principled. He's a highly religious man. Based on his convictions, I would hope that he leads his program in a way that would be admired by the people that hold those values and beliefs, because that's what he professes. It's difficult for me to believe it. We haven't seen, except for the connection that Chad made, the direct connection, but we see smoke going down different lanes. What do you say, David?
I'm going to say, Mark, I was like you. I was going to give me the benefit of the doubt until you give me a reason. And I think I found a couple reasons. One was when a lot of this came out, it was to save face right before National Signing Day. And I guess you can't blame them there, but we know the purpose. It was so they didn't lose a lot of recruits and have to defend themselves when a bunch of high school guys are looking to go to them. And it's shady, but I understand that if you're Ole Miss, that's kind of the route that it had to go. And another fact that we were led to believe this a lot. A lot of this also had to deal with pre-Hugh Freeze, and a lot of it was Houston Nutt was to blame. But now we're finding out that these rogue boosters were happening under both regimes, and a lot of these allegations were under Freeze. And now we're supposed to believe what he says after all this stuff comes out. And no, we've gave you the benefit of the doubt before, and I've just given two reasons why I just think they've kind of just set it up to where. I don't believe anything you want to tell me now. So it's and the Larry Tunsil situation at the draft, that sheds an ugly light, and we've heard those rumors for a while now, and that was another example of, like you said, there's a lot of smoke, there's fire, and it seems to be, with Ole Miss and Hugh Freeze, and I did a lot of research on Hugh Freeze because I really wanted him to be a candidate for the Florida job. But the more I was reading and the more I was hearing, I was like, maybe we should stay clear away from that. And we talked about it a couple weeks ago where Mike Bianchi Orlando Sentinel writer, had basically said Jeremy Foley, without saying Hugh Freeze's name, was not a candidate because of past transgressions and what was going on. So, if all this smoke comes up from multiple places, no, I don't think I'll believe what Hugh Freeze is selling right now.
Okay, Mike, Hugh Freeze's reputation definitely on the line concerning all these issues.
Well, I think you guys know how I feel about Hugh Freeze as a Tennessee fan. First of all, I agree with you. I don't like to impugn the integrity of individuals, particularly ones I don't know personally. But when you, just like David said, where there's smoke, oftentimes there's fire. Not always, but oftentimes. If you go back to Hugh Freeze's start of his collegiate career, it was all about Michael Orr. It was Eddie Orgeron's remarkable class at Ole Miss. Of course, Hugh Freeze was Michael Orr's high school coach. Michael Orr commits to Ole Miss, shows up, signs on campus, and Hugh Freeze is hired a week or two later as the assistant athletic director for football operations at Ole Miss. So, I mean, possibly Memphis is close to Oxford. There's possibly, maybe it was just coincidence, maybe it was circumstances. But when stuff like that happens, to me, that's pretty interesting. When a number one overall recruit goes to a school that doesn't have that pedigree. Again, that's just one incident. Of course, it rubs Tennessee fans the wrong way, of which I'm admittedly a Tennessee fan. They stole right from us. But you look at that. Here's the other thing. A lot of these coaches have years and years and years in the college ranks. Hugh Freeze only has really 10 years in the college ranks. So I think there's a lot of learning going on. I think Hugh Freeze has done a lot of learning. Here's the other thing. I think where a lot of coaches go astray, and I think this is probably the case with Hugh Freeze, is not the direct guidance of nefarious activities. It's the willingness to look the other way. I think that's what gets a lot of coaches. A lot of coaches probably know that there's stuff going on, and instead of going out there and getting rid of that amongst the boosters and the players and finding areas where they can improve, they manage just in the facility. They go to their recruiting trips, they follow the recruiting rules, and then they go back to the facility. And if something happens back in the hometown and they don't know about it, there's not much they can do. They're busy reading, watching the film, getting the playbooks ready, and making all the phone calls to the recruits. Where you get coaches who run really clean programs are the ones that go out and they tell the boosters, you are killing us if you do the bad things. They go out and they actually create this culture of compliance amongst the people who don't have necessarily who aren't necessarily bound by the university on like a jobs basis. You can't hire or fire. They create that they create the culture of compliance amongst the stakeholders, not just the employees. I think that's probably where a lot of coaches go astray, is they don't address that culture outside of the formal university structure. Now here's what Hugh Freeze has as his advantage. Ross Bjork, I think, is one of the two best athletic directors in the SEC. He's very good at communication. He's very good at managing, administrating, and leading that athletic department. I think working for Ross Bork might be the saving grace of Hugh Freeze. But if you look at him on draft night, that interview he did on ESPN, he did not look good. He looked exhausted. He looked shell-shocked. He just looked like a man who knew bad things were coming down the pike. So again, that's kind of what I think of Hugh Freeze. I think he probably willfully not ignores, but willfully accepts that things happen outside of his control and allows those things to happen as long as he doesn't know about them. That's what I think the deal is with Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss. Chad, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's it's a good take on all of it. I think you have to consider that it's a good point, Mike, that there is some learning curve. It was brought up that there were some things that happened in recruiting that they may or may not have been aware of, but at the same time, I know that these coaches have to attend clinics. They have to attend different training and things of that nature where these types of issues are brought up. The fact that you have an FCA group leader that was involved in this. That part of it to me is just kind of sets you back a little bit. Freeze did state that some of the offenses that involved some of his assistant coaches were not fireable to him, and I think a lot of that goes to the fact too, Mike, you pointed out, and other coaches have said, it's his integrity and where he stands. Mark, you brought that up as far as his his religious beliefs and where he stands. So, he probably could be very, very loyal to a fault, and that might end up biting him. Now, I will say this from my experiences of dealing with, and talking to people that were in and around Ole Miss's program during the period of Houston Nutt's era, the boosters it was a wild, wild west with some of those boosters in there. And so I feel like maybe some of that has bled over to Freeze's period there as head coach, and maybe they're going to try to clamp down on that a little bit more and try to keep those boosters from being involved so much. So that's just theory, and again, that's speculation. And a lot of that will be cleared up in the coming future. We just do know that boosters have been involved with the latest allegations that have come up, and they've been involved in the past. And so I think that that's something to keep in mind is, universities have to take a lot larger steps in creating the space between the boosters and the access to the players. And I think that's something that, Ole Miss and Hugh Freeze has definitely learned a lesson about, and they'll have to continue to grow from that going forward.
Chad, I think that's a great point. You talk about these clinics, and my point is, the only big-time program he's ever been around is Ole Miss. He coached there for 2 years, and so when his first experiences in these NCAA clinics, who's he learning from? He's learning from Ed Orgeron and Houston Nutt. I mean, they're probably both great guys, but I mean, when we look at the history of coaches who can do questionable things, I mean, those are two names that come up. So that's who he learned from when he first became a college coach. Then he had his time at Lambeth, I believe is a NAIA school or not a FBS school certainly, and then 2 years at Arkansas State, and then back to Ole Miss, where you talked about the culture of compliance certainly wasn't in place under Houston Nutt. We know that for a fact. So I think a lot of it is just kind of who he learned from coming up in the coaching ranks. A lot of these guys grow up and they spend 5 or 10 years as assistant coach at a big time school. Then they get to coach at a maybe an FCS or maybe a G5 school for 10 years, and then they finally get offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, maybe a head coaching job at a big time power program. So they have 10 or 15 years of institutional knowledge to apply to some of those finer points. It's probably easier to coach X's and O's than it is to follow the NCAA bylaws. That's my guess. And to manage a large organization. These college football coaches in the SEC are CEOs of multi-million-dollar corporations. So I think maybe that may be one of the issues with Hugh Freeze Ole Miss is maybe he just didn't have a really solid base when he took over that program there.
We are SEC Breakdown. We talk X's and O's, nuts and bolts, cover twos, and run-pass ratios on the field. Then we also talk about those issues that surround the game that affect the play on the field as well, as you can hear. So great discussion out of you guys tonight. Chad Niepling, David Waters, and Mike LaValle from Last Word on Sports. And this is your show of record for SEC football. And please join us on Twitter. That's SEC Breakdown. Easy to find. You got to join us there as well. All right, guys, great show.